Okay, thank you, Bobo. Appreciate it. Good to see everybody here. Everybody always gets on the back row. This is not the church. I guess we better get the offering plate to pass around there. I'm Gene Atkinson. I grew up here in Orangeburg. Went to Carolina, went to dental school in Charleston, and practiced here for 43 years, I believe, till I retired a couple of years ago. I worked till I was 72. So, in this day and time, it's expensive to live, so you got to work a long, long time. You can't retire at 55 anything. But anyway, history is a passion of mine. I've written 4 books on Orangeburg. You've probably seen those old black and white pictures and books, those paperback books in the bookstores. I've written 3 of those on Orangeburg, and the 4th one was about a lot of famous people, 157 people who were real famous, who did a lot of stuff to make Orangeburg what it was all over the last 150 years. But anyway, this is a program I did about 10 years ago over at the Historical Society, and I'm just glad to do it again here for you today. I'm going to have to go through some of these real fast because there's about 80 slides on here. This is a picture I just took the other day. In retirement, I try to go on vacation in the wintertime for a week or so, and I went down to Edisto Beach, and this is what Edisto Beach looked like the other day at a sunrise. So anyway, let's see if this, it's not working well. I'll use this. Here's my grandson about 3 years ago when he came down here for a tour of the fire station, and he had a ball and everything. The fire chief, then, I can't think of his name, who was the fire chief that just left about a year or 2 ago? Adams? Yeah, Mike Adams, that was his name. Yeah, he took Jake around for about 45 minutes, showed him everything, even got to crank the old siren on the engine number 1 over there. Do y'all still have it over there, engine number 1? Okay. This is probably one of the worst fires that ever happened in Orangeburg. I'm going to get into that later, but this is a girls' dormitory at Claflin in 1955 that burned down, and fortunately everybody got out. But anyway, this is the history of the Orangeburg Fire Department. They didn't have a fire department until about 1854. There was a terrible fire downtown in the business district, and it just destroyed a lot of the business district. And so they started getting together, the town leaders and so forth, and they formed a voluntary fire department. And it's called the Young America Fire Engine Company. And here's a picture of them from probably 1860. This is Middleton Street right here, the street that's right out there. And here's the square right there with the courthouse in the middle back then. St. Paul's Methodist Church, that's the old church with the steeple over there. Williams & Williams law firm is right over there. But anyway, here are all the volunteers with the Young American with their rig that they've got there to pump. I think it's a hand pumper thing where they have to pump back and forth. I'm going to show you something that's unique on here. You see these tree seedlings or saplings or whatever you want to call them, they're immature, but they got wooden boxes around them. Does anybody know why they've got wooden boxes around them? Keep the horses from eating them and eating the bark off and killing the trees. Cars didn't come around until about 1900. I think the first one here in Orangeburg was 1905 or 6, and there was a used Oldsmobile, I think. Mr. I can't think of his name right now. Went all the way down to Savannah to get it, and of course the roads back then were deplorable, so you can imagine. I think they said you could get about 150 miles on a set of tires back then. It was awful. We get 70,000 now. This is their Young American Steam Engine Fire Engine office right there, station house, around 1900. You see a steeple back there. That is the First Baptist Church. This is essentially in the front yard of what is now the First Baptist Church. And here's where, that little angled parking area right in front with about 7, 8 parking spaces. This house, fire station house, stood right there. And you can see the old steam pumper here that they had back in those days. Now, another one was the East End Fire Company, because they were down on the east end of town, almost near Railroad Corner down there. There were 4 basic volunteer fire departments over the years back then. And here's the Young Americas again, and this fellow right here, Mr. T.O.S. Dibble, was the ringleader for that for probably 30 years or more, so forth. There's First Baptist Church, that's the old church that was there. That was built in 1860. And here they are again in 1902, and let me getting too fast here. And there's Mr. Dibble right there at the end on that. And that's one of the steam engines right there. And of course, they were horse-drawn, and see all the reels with the hoses and so forth then. Here's on the east end. This is the courthouse on the square. They're backed up against that, and those volunteers are there. From what I understand, the old City Hall was where City Hall is now. And they had, on top of it, they had a little rooftop thing with a fire bell. So whenever a fire was spotted, a man would run up to the top of that and start ringing the bell and then shouting out as people would be going by where the fire was so all the volunteers could come forth. Because you got to realize everything centered around Orangeburg within about 1 block of the downtown business area back then. Here's all 4 volunteer fire departments back in 1915. This one over here was the Phoenix. It was an African-American fire department. They've had several names through the years, the Phoenix and the Comet and so forth, but they would run out of money and go defunct for a year or two, and then they'd raise some money and come back on, because everything was volunteer and you had to raise the money yourself to do everything. This is a parade here in Orangeburg. What I wanted to show you here, this First Baptist Church is right over here. Here's the square over here. This is the fireman's statue. Bubba, where is that statue located now?
Front left corner of the city council chamber.
Okay, so in front of to the left front of the old fire station then. Okay. This right in about 1905 or 6, the townspeople got together and raised the money for this right here. This is a storage thing to put ice, big blocks of ice. So you didn't have refrigeration and everything back then. You'd buy ice from the ice house and so forth. And they'd put, on summer days especially, a couple of blocks of ice up there and in the top, and it'd melt down. And the unique thing about this was it had things at every level. They had a higher level where the water fountains, and that was good cold water in the summertime back then for people. And then the horses had one about mid-level. Excuse me, this is for humans. This is for horse. Maybe I'm getting it wrong. But anyway, the bottom one was for dogs. It was low enough for dogs to come up and get water. And then the horses and mules would get it at the mid-level, and the people would get it at the top level. I think it cost $700 back in about 1905 or 6 when they bought it. So, and you can see everything was with horses and buggies back then. This is St. Paul's Methodist Church downtown. This is the Elliott Hook and Ladder Company, and this is their ladder truck there. The 2 white horses worked for them for years and years, and their names were Tom and Fly. And they were well known around the community back then. Here's a picture on Russell Street. I think the Palmetto Office Supply is about right here, if you're familiar with that. And anyway, here's the Elliott Independent Hook and Ladder thing with Tom and Fly bringing the ladder carriage down and so forth. And this is a composite of 3 pictures. All these were in front of St. Paul's Methodist Church and then the old post office, which is now Williams & Williams law firm downtown. But this is the Young Americans with their first regular motorized truck that they got around 1912, I believe. And then here's the ladder wagon right there with Tom and Fly. Here's another little fire cart right here at there on the bottom. Here's Tom and Fly again with the ladders and everything. This was the funeral for one of their members. And back then, when they do funerals, they'd use the fire equipment for one of their dedicated workers and so forth. And this is all volunteers thing. And they'd put the casket as well as all the flowers on the cart and everything and take it to the church and all that, and then up to the cemetery. And back then, Sunnyside was and Orangeburg Cemetery about the only 2 cemeteries in town. Here's that first motorized fire truck that the Young Americans had that they got around 1912. They used to call some of these chemical trucks because they had these fire extinguishers that had the chemicals that were popular in that day and time. Of course, the technology is far superior to that now with extinguishers and so forth. One thing I want you to notice about St. Paul's Church, you can see how the windows are swivel right there. Air conditioning didn't come around until a long time ago. And until, the 1950s or so is when you'd see air conditioning around in many places. And so like in the church, they had those on swivels where they'd open them up in the summertime so you can get some fresh air in there. This right here, if y'all know where Dora Park is, right just off the square, this building, the Scoville building, has caught fire 3 or 4 or 5 times over the years. And basically, this is right after a fire and a lot of people, townspeople are lined up in here. Everything. But this particular fire didn't do a lot of damage at that time, but a lot of interior damage more so than anything. And here is a pretty well involved fire at South Carolina State University in 1916. This is Morrill Hall. That was the main building they had there with administration. They had classes and chemistry labs and all that there too. So that went up in just horrible blaze. And like I said, they didn't have the equipment for big time things then. I think this cup right here is called the Barron's Cup, named for Lewis Barron's, who was the fire chief for Charleston. He was the leader of South Carolina Fire Association for many, many, many years. Y'all come on in. We got plenty of seats. But Orangeburg won this competition in both 1916 and 1923, where fire crews from all the different towns would go and compete against each other in various events on how to put out fires and all kinds of other athletic endeavors. And I think that's in the chief's office right now. But is this Barron's Cup in the chief's office now?
In mine.
In yours now? Okay, good. So y'all need to go look at that. I mean, Orangeburg won against all the other fire departments in South Carolina in those 2 years, 1916 and 1923. Here's a picture from around 1920. The city of Orangeburg took over all the firefighting duties in 1920. And this was one of the fire carts they had right in the beginning. And here are some of the leaders there. And this is with the Barron's Cup. I think they just won the Barron's Cup or something after this. This is Chief Herman Fisher right here, who was the first chief of the consolidated fire departments that the city took over with. And this is his brother, Al, I can't remember, Chief Fisher. But anyway, he took over after his brother died in 1943 or 4 and was chief until 1965. And then here's some of the other firefighters there back in those days. At first they had a mixture of a couple of full-time paid firefighters as well as some volunteers. So, and here's from the Barron's Cup competition, and you can see a hose there, and they were measuring something of what they did in the competition there. All right, here's the stalwart team right there that participated in the Barron's Cup back in the 1920s there. And there's Chief Fisher right there, and there's his brother right there. Clarence Fisher, that's his name. Sorry, I couldn't remember it. When you get old like me, you can't come up with names fast like you used to. And here, this is over on the square on the side where Cresses used to be. You see these little turrets right there sticking out? Those Victorian turrets. One of the original fire stations was right here. There used to be like a Mediterranean restaurant that closed there in the last couple of months. And anyway, that was right on the square. And again, here's the Scoville fire. Like I said, they had 3 or 4 big fires there, and this was in the late, I think it's 1916 there, but that's where Dora Park is today, and so forth. But you can see how it's fully involved right there, and you can see a hose on it right there. Townspeople used to really gather around there. This is the 1927 fire, and this was taken from the hotel on the other side of Middleton Street that runs down here. And you can see how they've already climbed up ladders, and they've got firefighters up there getting ready to spray down all that, where they're going through the roof. City Councilman Albert Watson died in 1927. And back then they had a mayor and 2 city councilmen. And his duty, what he did with the city, he was overall supervisor for the fire department. And so when he died, this is the first engine truck. It's this 1922 Seagraves ladder truck right there. This, you can see all the flowers, and his casket was on the back right there. This is on the block of 301 between Middleton Street and Broughton Street right there. That's where he lived. And they turned around the corner as they went to the Episcopal Church, and when they got up to the fire station, the old fire station on Middleton, they ended up stopping and pausing, and they rang the bell a certain number of times in honor, in memory of him, for all he had contributed to the fire department over the years. And here's that the same funeral in front of the Episcopal Church over there on Russell Street, and you can see all the flowers laden right there. This is a picture. I've got the date wrong on this. I thought it's from the 1930s, but this gentleman right there, his daughter, this is Virgil Westbury, said that he didn't start until 1942 at the fire department. But here's old engine number, let's see, this is number 1 right here. And you can see these others they had and so forth. Here's the chief's car. Looks very modern, doesn't it? And this is the old fire station that was in use until 2006. Here's another fire right off the square. It used to be a building that they had to bulldoze down about 5 years ago. And Williams & Williams has a parking lot right here, and their office is in the old post office right there. But this is Middleton Street going down. But everybody used to turn out for fires, a lot of onlookers. Notice the men. Men always wore hats up until about the 1950s. Whenever they went in public, they always had a hat on. Now we have baseball hats on much of the time. But this hotel was built in 1912 by Mr. W.C. Wolfe. And at the time, it was the second highest structure in all of South Carolina, and so forth. But you can see how over here on this building, they had hoses up there squirting over to it. But this fire was so spectacular that the Columbia Fire Department had to be called down. They sent 3 trucks and 15 men, or either 14 men, down to help Orangeburg fight this spectacular fire. And they ended up rebuilding it after that, after everything was over with. Here's the fireman's statue when it stood between the old fire station and City Hall. And then, like I said, it's moved to the left side over there now of the old fire station there. And here's a picture again from 1942 of the fireman. Here's old number 1, I think, right there. And but anyway, you can see how they're all up there. They used volunteers to supplement their force until about 1950 or so, until it was a full-time job for everybody being a fireman. And here are some of those same guys in 1942. Here's Chief Herman Fisher. Excuse me. And he died around 1943 or 4 or 5, and then his brother Clarence Fisher took over from then until 1965. And this David Gillum took over in 1965 to 1969, and then he went to be the executive director of the South Carolina Firemen's Association in Columbia after that. Here's one of the old trucks. They had a side bay in the back on the left side coming out on that side street, and this truck was always parked there. There's a pumper from way back yonder. And but I had, from the Historical Society, I went and looked, and I had dates on when they purchased all these things, but I couldn't find my notes on that to be able to do it. But if y'all ever want to go over there, they're open on usually Tuesday morning from about 10 to 1, and Wednesday from about 10 until 3 o'clock. And they got a file with about 150 pages over there on the fire department from Orangeburg. You can get a lot of information on that. Backing up, you can see they've got the, around 1950, they got the fireman's statue over there on the left side. And I think they used to have the bell there too, the bell that went along with it. And here, they'd always put a fire truck or 2 in the Christmas parade, and here's one of the firemen with one of his children going right down by the square during the Christmas parade. Yeah, all of Orangeburg would turn out for the Christmas parade. And the fire station was always decorated at Christmas time. They had a star up there, and they had Merry Christmas and lights there. Of course, this is the bunk room for where they would stay overnight. Now, they started a tradition in 1949, I believe, where they had a big banquet every year. And this big banquet, they'd get all the town leaders and so forth in there, and they had the wives. The wives would cook, and they were attending also. And they'd have a special guest speaker from out of town, usually coming almost every year to them. And those were quite a big function. You see how they had to move all the trucks out of the firehouse to be able to do this particular thing. And here are some of the men there. Right there, that's one of the firemen's wives right there who's helping with the serving and so forth. And here's the head table right there. This is Chief Fisher right there. This is former Mayor Walker, Mr. Alec Brown, who was the city administrator, and then in the he was a city engineer at first in the 40s, and then in the 1950s he was the city administrator until the early 60s, I believe. This is the Episcopal priest, Reverend Tisdale, and this fellow is Ernie Wright, who was the head of the Chamber of Commerce, so forth. And you can see people used to smoke cigars a lot back then. A lot of men smoked. And here are some of the firemen, retired volunteers over the years that they honored that particular year in 1950 on February 24th. There's only two people I've identified in there. Right there, that's my grandfather, whom I'm named after. He was a volunteer fireman back in the 1910s and 20s, so forth. This fellow, you won't recognize him, but many of you old-timers will know that's Mr. J.W. Smoke, who had the famous J.W. Smoke hardware for about 60 or 70 years in Orangeburg until it closed around 1980. Actually, he started in 1896, and then his son-in-law took over after he died, and it was viable until about 1980, I think, downtown there. It was the place to go to get hardware. And here's one of the old trucks right there. And Chief Fisher in 1955 was the president of the State Firemen's Association, and they had the big meeting and dinner at the what is now the Arts Center down by the river and so forth. And here's some of the Orangeburg firemen there. There's Virgil Westbury. I think that's Bob Sharpton right there. I can't recognize who that is. And there's Chief Fisher, who was president that particular year, and he's up on the podium there. And this is the chief's brand new car, 1951 to 52 Dodge Coronet, way back then. And here's some of the men all posed for a semi-formal picture there, all the firemen. This is 1954 roughly. It's Chief Fisher right there. Ben Antley was the assistant chief, and later Ted Johnson was the assistant chief. And in 1954, they got this beautiful new American LaFrance pumper. And it came to Orangeburg in a railroad car. And they had to devise some scaffolding and everything up there to build a ramp to be able to get that thing out of there. And you can see Mr. Virgil Westbury getting ready to climb up into the driver's seat there. Didn't have much room there, and drive it out. This is down near Railroad Corner, South Carolina Estates, over here to the left, and that Trinity Methodist Church is over there to the right there, this location. This is one of the side tracks on the railroad there. And here he is when he's almost off the thing. Here's Chief Fisher looking and looking to make sure the wheels don't go off the ramp they'd built and so forth. But everything, they got it off all right. And this pumper was here for at least 30 years, I think. But if you haven't noticed, all the old fire trucks were open air convertibles. You don't see that now. In fact, I can remember seeing firemen in the 1950s going to a fire on the rear deck on there. You'd have a couple of firemen standing up and holding on to a rod or something on the back of the fire truck. So come on in, we got plenty of seats. But you can see that Trinity Methodist Church right there in the background that I was telling you about. And here's that pumper right in front of the station there. It was modern and had everything on it for the day. They even had the city seal on them. Do y'all have the seal on the side of the trucks now too? Okay, good. And here's some of the firemen here from the early 1950s. There's David Gillum, who was the chief later on from 1965 to 69. Ted Johnson was the assistant chief during that time. And here's some of the other firemen. Ben Antley back in the 50s was the assistant chief, deputy chief, so forth. There's Marion Abnett, who was the chief from around 1969 to about 1989. And here are the wives of the men. This picture is a little fuzzy. It's not too clear, but I had to go on what I had. And this is a banquet they had to entertain their wives. And this was back around 1952. And here's another picture of them there. They were like family, all of them together. And Chief Clarence Fisher, this is a picture of him in 1960. And I heard the story one time from one fella that Chief Fisher didn't like this guy was doing with the fire department. He had to discipline him and called him into his office and says, "How bad do you need this job?" And the fellow said, "I really need it. Don't fire me." So he didn't fire him, but he was a pretty stern guy from what I understand. This is the Claflin fire with the girls' dormitory in Mary Dunton Hall on February 6, 1955. Horrible fire, completely destroyed this. I think there's like a U-shaped dormitory there with little walkways in the middle right there between them. And you can see some of the mid part where it goes around the corner to come back around like that. But you can see they got that ladder truck they got in 1949. There's a 65-foot ladder truck to help put out the fire here. And here's another one right there. And you can see that walkway to get inside, to get to the doors on either side, to get into the dorms. And fortunately, everybody got out and nobody was hurt. One of my neighbors across the street, when I was a little boy back then, worked with DPU. He was a supervisor or something. They called him out at 3 o'clock in the morning or whenever it was to come and cut all the electricity to there so they wouldn't have problems with electricity while they were putting out the fire, so we wouldn't get shocked to anything. I guess y'all still have to coordinate that now, don't you, Bobo, with the DPU to kill the power on things. And here's a fire at St. Paul Baptist Church. It's an African-American church. They've since moved. This is 1956, but it's out on just off of 301. You remember where Central Park, that little drive-through hamburger joint was? I was across the street from that, and it was about halfway down that block is where that was. They've since moved out on the Roseville Road, about halfway out to what used to be the Methodist home out there. But again, they were using the 65-foot ladder truck to be able to help squelch this. And one of the benevolent things that the fire department did back then, at Christmas time, there was a central location for all these baskets for poor families. And you can see the Sunbeam Bread. Mayor Jennings was the mayor for, I think, 16 years, and he owned the Sunbeam Bakery, and he would always donate hundreds of loaves of bread to fill these baskets and so forth. And other grocery stores would donate things, and the Boy Scouts here would help deliver them going around town. Another benevolent thing that they did was back in those days in the 50s and 60s and even the 70s, people, when their children would outgrow their toys and everything, or they moved on and got older and so forth, they would donate them to the fire station, and they would fix them up, sand them down, and paint them, and make them usable to give to poor children at Christmas time. So that was a good ministry that they had back then, and the firemen would always be working doing that, fixing bicycles and whatever. You can see a little car thing that they would get in, tricycle, and so forth. So they did a lot of good deeds back then. And here they are working on some of the bicycles and so forth. They even got a little doll carriage there, and you can see more bicycles and tricycles in the background. But they did real good with that. It was a good ministry they had for the poor people in Orangeburg. And you can see some of the wagons and so forth. They were refurbishing, painting, and getting new wheels and so forth to be able to give out. Well, here's upstairs, and where they would bunk in when they had the duty. I think back then they would work 24 hours on and have 1 or 2 days off or something like that. I can't remember the parameters that they had back then, but you can see the fire pole thing and that y'all still have here right outside there. To get into the bay where all the trucks are. Does anybody use the fire pole, or they always go down the steps? Modern era. Look at those modern beds there. And around 1951 or 2, they got a rescue truck and everything, and you can see all the rescue equipment they had on it with fans to blow smoke out of places and stuff. And one of my memories was, at all the Orangeburg High School football games, this rescue truck would be parked in the end zone in case a player got injured and had to be taken to the hospital back then. But this is the forerunner of having an ambulance service, kind of. The ambulance service in Orangeburg until 1970 was provided by the funeral homes, and they wouldn't charge because they were hoping to get your business later on when your family died or something like that. But they do it for free, and so. But then the county realized they had to take over because there were just too many things happening, and we were getting too big back then. But you can see all the equipment they have there. Now here's that 65-foot ladder truck that was purchased in 1949 from American LaFrance. That's Mr. Virgil Westbury up there driving it there and so forth. And here's the old 1922 Seagraves ladder truck. And they still use it until probably the 1960s, I think, when they moved on to, or maybe in the 1970s, until they moved on to another ladder truck. So this basically was a spare, you know, if they needed a second ladder truck at big fires. And during Fire Prevention Week, which is always in October, they would go out to schools and demonstrate shooting the water out of a truck to the kids, and the kids really loved it. They'd go around and do free inspections at your home to give you ideas on what to do to make your house more fireproof. If you've got stuff gathered around that could be a fire hazard, they'd tell you what to do and so forth. And they always had a sign right there because people get excited when they see a fire truck. They always want to go and follow it to the fire. And so they put no fire, the company is inspecting and so forth. And here's some of the trucks back in the mid-1950s right there. There's old number 1 right there. And look at this one right here. That's an old one. It looks like a Dodge almost that was converted into a fire truck. And another thing they did, the firemen would repair things in the city, all the meters, parking meters, they'd repair them when they got broken and so forth. So they did a lot of repair work and so forth in the downtime that they had. And every year back then, the Boy Scouts would take over symbolically the city offices of fire chief, police chief, mayor, and all city councilmen and so forth. And here's some of them out in front of the old fire station with the fire chief's car back in 1959, roughly. And here's a demonstration. They were out at the fairgrounds. That's the old exhibit building. You don't see those steps going up, or seats going up there now. They cut those out about 40 years ago. But anyway, this is in the mid-1950s. They were demonstrating, you know, putting out a fire. I don't know whether it's for new trainees or they were just doing a demonstration there. And starting around 1960, they started building their own trucks. They built 3 trucks from scratch. You can see them in the fire station in one of that side bay there doing that. 2 of them were Chevrolet trucks, and they were pumpers. And then they had a small pickup truck that was converted into a small ladder truck. But you can see them right there welding and putting everything together. And here's, you know, before they got started, how it looked and so forth. And I know what I want to show back here. Here's the old fire bell. Do you know where the fire bell is now? Is it here?
Station 2.
Where?
Station 2.
Station 2, okay. And here are these 2 trucks. They had them out demonstrating and so forth. Notice how firemen wore ties all the time back then. They dressed up for the occasion. They were neat. And here are the 3 trucks that they built from scratch. Here's a pickup with a small ladder thing on it, and then these 2 are pumpers right there. Here's old number 1 right here, purchased by the city in 1920. When Chief Gillum retired in 1969, Mayor Fair was congratulating him here, and here's his preacher right there, and they had a big banquet for his retirement back in 1969 when he went to be the executive director of the State Firemen's Association. And here's a picture of all the firemen in 1966. You can see they have to have larger numbers as Orangeburg was growing back then, so forth. This is Sonny Glover, who ended up being the chief back in the early 1990s. There. And here's 1967 also, some of the firemen all lined up. And David Gillum was the chief at that time. I'm trying to see where Marion and Abnett, there's Marion and Abnett, who was the next chief after that. And here's David Gillum when he was the chief, and Ted Johnson, who was the deputy chief, or assistant chief, or whatever the name of the position was. Here's a fire that they had a picture in the archives on this, and you can see them scrambling around trying to put out this fire. And I think I was telling you before, Bobo, that many of these old pictures came from the vault of DPU, where they've been in storage for years in the vault down there, so nothing will happen to them and so forth. So if you ever really need to dig them up, you can. But I've got many of them scanned and copied on my computer and everything. We're almost through. And here's station number 2 when they were building it. You see the big pile of sand to make cement and so forth, the blocks. And this is the grand opening on January 19th, 1969. Very few of it you recognize. There's Tom Bryant, who's an attorney here in town right now. And that day, they had a couple of special guests. This is Chief Clarence Fisher, who was with the fire department from 1920 to 1965. And was the chief from about 1944, 45 until 1965. And then David Gillum, who was the current chief back then. And this is Mayor Bill Livingston. Right behind you over here, that big white mansion, that was his house. And he had a food brokerage business in town. But he was the mayor in 1920, and the significance of that is that's when the city took over the firefighting duties from all the volunteer fire departments. So they honored them at that particular time. And here they are on old number 1 up there, sitting in it. This is a fire on Broughton Street, about 100 or 200 feet off from Russell. This is old Mr. Cecil Williams, the tailor. This was his tailoring office that caught on fire up here. And his son Cecil Williams is the famous photographer here in town. But anyway, you can see how all the hoses were there going up and down Broughton Street and so forth, and they were able to put it out with only interior damage. Here's another truck I think they built. It was kind of a supply truck, a service truck, and had some ladders and stuff on it. And the fire hose, it must have been a small pumper too. They might have had a tank in there with some water. This is up, you know where the Dora shed is now up there near First Baptist Church? This is the location of that. It used to be Clark's Furniture Company, and there was a big fire in the early 1970s there. And you can see the ladder truck having to spray down. Oops, keep my hand on here. Let's see. That's old number 1. It was housed out at the fairgrounds for many, many years until y'all took it over probably about 10 years ago, I guess. And I think they've been trying to restore it little by little for many years. But anyway, it was American of France. The city bought it in April of 1920 for $12,000. It could pump 1,000 gallons a minute. Had a 125 horsepower engine. Big deal in those days. And the fellow who put the tires on these things said it was the devil on these old wooden rims and everything, putting those tires on there. He had a tough time doing that. And when they moved to the new headquarters here in 2006, I took this picture a couple months after they moved here. And this is a picture I took last summer in August of 2022 there. And this is before you got the black and the red trucks. Do you have 2 of them or 3 of them now? 3? Okay. What do they run, about $600,000 or $700,000 each?
The engine was $650. The tower was 1.7.
Golly. Woo. And here's beautiful Edisto Gardens, and that's the end. So I hope you enjoyed seeing a little history of Orangeburg, of the fire department from way back in the days when they had volunteer departments. So, thank you.